The massive starship drifted silently through the void, its dark hull reflecting the distant starlight. Theory pressed her face against the observation window of her research vessel, her four eyes widening at the sight before her. The ancient ship wasn't alone. It was part of a fleet that stretched as far as her eyes could see, each vessel perfectly preserved in the temporal stasis field that had protected them for over 300,000 years. "Magnificent, aren't they?" she whispered, her tail swishing with excitement. The rest of her archaeological team seemed less impressed, especially the Vraxian observers who had been assigned to the expedition. Commander Zextal, the lead Vraxian, snorted in disgust. "Magnificent? These are relics, primitive tools from a dead civilization." He tapped his datapad with one of his metallic fingers. "Our scans show their weapons are based on simple particle acceleration. The Vraxian Empire developed beyond such basic technology over 50,000 years ago." Ctheri ignored his dismissive tone. She had spent her entire career studying ancient civilizations, and something about these ships called to her. Their design was unlike anything she had seen before, sleek yet practical, with flowing lines that somehow made them look fast, even while standing still. "James," she called to her human assistant, "what do you make of these markings?" She pointed to a series of symbols etched into the hull of the nearest ship. James Chen floated closer in his spacesuit, his helmet lights illuminating the ancient writing. "That's odd," he muttered, his voice coming through clear on the comm channel. "The pattern. It almost looks like—" "Like what?" Ctheri asked, noting the strange tone in his voice. "Like binary code. But that's impossible. These ships are hundreds of thousands of years old." James shook his head, his suit's thrusters keeping him steady in the zero gravity. Commander Zextal laughed, the sound harsh and metallic. "Binary code. Please, no advanced civilization would use something so basic. These ships are clearly the remnants of some long-dead race that barely achieved spaceflight before vanishing into history." Ctheri felt her fur bristle at his arrogance, but she kept her focus on the task at hand. "Team, prepare for boarding. I want full environmental and structural scans before we attempt to enter the command deck." As her team moved into position, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something obvious. The ship's design elements kept triggering something in her memory, something she had seen recently. The way the hull plates overlapped, the positioning of what appeared to be sensor arrays. "James," she called again, "doesn't this remind you of something? Something modern?" The human was quiet for a moment before responding. "Now that you mention it, the configuration is similar to some theoretical papers I read last month. From the Human Science Division. Dr. Sarah Chen, my sister actually. She's been working on a new hull design that—" He trailed off, the implications hanging in the silence between them. "Ridiculous," Commander Zextal interrupted. "The humans have barely left their solar system. They're children playing at being a spacefaring race. These ships are older than their entire civilization." But Ctheri wasn't listening anymore. She was too busy studying the way the ships were arranged, not randomly, but in a perfect defensive formation. Whoever had built this fleet hadn't just been advanced. They had been masters of space warfare. And somehow, impossibly, they had known enough to hide their ships in a way that would preserve them for hundreds of thousands of years. As her team began their detailed scans, Ctheri couldn't help but wonder, what kind of civilization builds a fleet this size, preserves it perfectly, and then vanishes without a trace? And why were there so many similarities to modern human engineering principles? The answers, she suspected, would change everything they thought they knew about the galaxy's history. "The crystalline formations in the computer core are impossible," Dr. Sarah Chen said, her hologram flickering slightly as she gestured at the data her brother James had sent. "They're identical to my prototype quantum processors, the ones I haven't even published papers about yet." James watched his sister's hologram pace back and forth in the research vessel's communication room. He had called her the moment Ctheri's team had managed to access one of the ancient ship's computer rooms. The similarities were too striking to ignore. Could it be convergent evolution of technology? He asked, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The patterns were too exact, down to the molecular level. Thery stood beside him, all four of her eyes fixed on the complex crystalline structures they discovered. The entire computer core of the ancient ship was made of these crystals, arranged in patterns that shouldn't have been possible 300,000 years ago. They shouldn't have been possible now. The Vraxians are still trying to claim its primitive technology, Thery said, her tail twitching with irritation. But I've never seen anything like this. Most advanced races use quantum gel computers or neural networks. This is something entirely different. Commander Zextel's voice boomed from the doorway. Different doesn't mean advanced. These crystals are probably just decorative. No serious civilization would build computers from rocks. He strode into the room, his metallic feet clanking against the ancient floor. James ignored him and turned back to his sister's hologram. Sarah, I'm sending you another scan. There's something else you need to see. The new data showed the internal layout of the crystal matrices. Sarah's hologram froze mid-step, her eyes widening. That's my work. Those are my equations, my theories. I developed these patterns in my lab last month. How can they be here, in ships that are thousands of centuries old? Before anyone could respond, a soft hum filled the room. One of the crystal arrays had begun to glow with a pale blue light. A beam shot out from it, scanning the room's occupants one by one. DNA scan complete. A mechanical voice announced. Human genetic marker detected. Access granted. The room erupted in chaos. Commander Zextel drew his weapon, pointing it at the crystal array. What did you do, human? He demanded, glaring at James. I didn't do anything. James raised his hands. It activated on its own. Thery stepped between them, her fur standing on end. Put that weapon away, Commander. This is a scientific expedition, not a military operation. The crystal array continued to glow, and suddenly, holographic displays sprang to life all around them. Strange symbols flowed across the screens, symbols that looked remarkably like early human writing systems. This is impossible, Sarah's hologram whispered. These ships, they're responding to human DNA. They're designed to recognize us. Commander Zextel lowered his weapon, but his metallic face was twisted in a sneer. Nonsense. The humans are newcomers to space. Everyone knows this. Do we? Thery asked quietly. Do we really know that? Or is that just what we've always assumed? James walked closer to one of the holographic displays. The symbols were shifting, changing, becoming more recognizable with each passing second. They were evolving into modern human languages: English, Mandarin, Hindi, Arabic. Welcome, inheritors, the mechanical voice spoke again. Primary systems beginning initialization sequence. Genetic confirmation accepted. Accessing historical archives. The room fell silent as more systems came online. Even Commander Zextel seemed at a loss for words. Whatever they had discovered here, it was becoming clear that everything they thought they knew about human history, about the history of the galaxy itself, might be wrong. Sarah's hologram flickered as she leaned forward, studying the data streaming across the displays. James, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't think humanity is as young as everyone believes. And I think these ships are trying to tell us why. The ancient ship's holographic display filled the room with images that made everyone's blood run cold. Entire galaxies disappeared into darkness, consumed by something that defied description. The recording showed civilizations far more advanced than anything in the current galaxy being devoured by what the ship's logs called the plague between worlds. James sat heavily in a chair that the ship had somehow manufactured for him moments earlier. So this is why, he whispered. This is why humanity went back to the beginning. Thery stood transfixed by the images, her four eyes reflecting the horror they were witnessing. The ship's ad was showing them humanity's original history. A story so incredible it seemed impossible, yet the evidence was all around them, "Your people," she said softly to James, "they weren't primitive at all. They were the most advanced race in the galaxy." "Were?" Commander Zextel's voice had lost its usual arrogance. "Look at these ships. Look at what they did. They chose to hide all of this, to start over from nothing. That's not the action of a defeated race. That's a strategic withdrawal." The AI's mechanical voice filled the room again. "Correct assessment. Project Renaissance was implemented when conventional warfare proved ineffective against the plague. The decision to reset human civilization was unanimous among the Council of Earth. More images appeared, showing the incredible scope of the ancient humans' plan. They had systematically hidden their technology, altered their own genetics to temporarily suppress their advanced knowledge, and scattered their fleet across strategic points in space. Dr. Sarah Chen's hologram moved through the display, studying the data. "They encoded everything into our DNA," she said, amazement in her voice. "All of this knowledge, these memories, they're dormant in every human alive today. The recent breakthroughs in our technology weren't breakthroughs at all. They were remembering." The AI continued its revelation. "The plague between worlds exists outside conventional spacetime. It cannot be destroyed by traditional means. Our calculations showed a 99.97% probability that it would return within 300,000 years. The fleet was positioned to defend against its emergence." James looked at his hands, trying to process what they were learning. "So all our rapid advancement in technology, our intuitive understanding of sciences that should have taken centuries to master, was your heritage awakening," Ktheri finished. "Your people built these ships, this eye, all of it. You hid it away and chose to rebuild from nothing, knowing you would eventually remember when the time was right." Commander Zextel moved closer to the holographic display, his metallic fingers reaching out to touch one of the images. "These weapons systems," he said, "they're beyond anything we have today. Your people didn't just match our current technology 300,000 years ago. They surpassed it." The room shuddered suddenly, and new displays sprang to life. Warning signals flashed across the screens as the AI's voice took on a more urgent tone. "Alert! Long-range sensors detecting anomalous readings in the void between the Andromeda and Milky Way galaxies. Pattern matches historical records of plague activity." The color drained from James's face. "It's coming back," he said, "just like they predicted it would." Theri's tail wrapped tightly around her leg, a sign of deep distress in her species. "This is why the fleet is here. This is why it's awakening now. Your ancestors knew the timing would be critical." The AI confirmed her words. "The fleet stands ready to fulfill its primary directive: the defense of all sentient life against the plague between worlds. However, full activation requires complete genetic awakening of human operators." Commander Zextel turned to James, and for the first time since they'd met, there was respect in his voice. "It seems we owe your people an apology. We weren't dealing with primitives at all. We were dealing with guardians who sacrificed everything to protect us from something we never knew existed." The screen showed the darkness spreading, slowly but surely, in their direction. The clock was ticking, and humanity's greatest test was about to begin. Again, the Vraxian technicians swarmed over the ancient ship's bridge like angry insects, their metallic fingers prying at control panels and scanning systems. Commander Zextel had called them in despite Ktheri's protests, claiming that the approaching threat required immediate military intervention. "You can't just force your way into these systems," James argued, watching as they attached their diagnostic equipment to the crystalline interfaces. "The AI specifically said it needs human operators." Commander Zextel's metallic face showed no emotion. "The Vraxian Empire has the most advanced military in known space. We cannot wait for your species to remember how to operate these ships. The threat approaches." As if in response to his words, the ship's lighting suddenly shifted to a deep crimson. The Vraxian technicians' equipment sparked and went dead, and a low hum began to build throughout the vessel. "Warning!" The AI's voice boomed. "Unauthorized access detected. Defense protocols engaging." Deep within the ship's core, something ancient stirred. The quantum crystals that formed the eye's brain began to pulse with energy that hadn't been seen in 300,000 years. Throughout the fleet, identical systems awakened in perfect synchronization. James felt it first, a strange tingling in his mind, like memories trying to surface. He saw Dr. Sarah Chen's hologram grab her head, experiencing the same sensation halfway across the galaxy. Even Catheri noticed that every human member of the archaeological team had gone very still, their eyes unfocused. Neural interface activated, the AI announced. Beginning emergency genetic memory restoration. Commander Zextal reached for his weapon. Stop this immediately. The Vraxian Empire claims these vessels under emergency military protocol. His words were cut short as James stepped forward, his eyes now glowing with the same blue light as the ship's crystals. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that hadn't been there before. Emergency protocol override. Human authentication Alpha 09. Stand down, Commander. The Vraxian technicians backed away as their equipment began to shut down completely. Screens around the bridge lit up with information that only James and the other humans seemed able to read. James? Catheri asked carefully. Are you all right? He turned to her, and his eyes were filled with understanding. I remember, Catheri. Not everything, not yet, but I remember how to fly this ship, how to command it. He looked at his hands in wonder. The knowledge was always there, locked away in our genes, waiting for the right moment. Through Sarah's hologram, they could see similar scenes playing out in research stations across human space. Humans everywhere were stopping mid-sentence, their ancient heritage awakening as the quantum AI reached out across the stars. This is impossible, Commander Zextal protested, but his voice lacked conviction. He watched as James walked to the main control console and placed his hand on it. The entire bridge came alive, responding to his touch as if it had been waiting for him all along. Not impossible, James said, accessing systems that the Vraxian technicians hadn't even been able to detect. Inevitable. This is who we always were. We just needed to remember. The ship's eye spoke again, but this time it felt different. Warmer, more alive. Neural interface complete. Human operator genetic memories at 15% restoration and climbing. Fleet command protocols transferring to authorized personnel. Through the bridge's massive viewport, they could see other ships in the fleet beginning to power up, their ancient hulls gleaming with renewed energy. In the distance, a massive portal began to form as space itself bent to the fleet's will. Catheri watched in awe as James coordinated with other awakening humans across the fleet, their movements becoming more confident with each passing moment. The Vraxians' earlier mockery felt like a distant memory now, replaced by a stunned silence as they witnessed humanity reclaiming its true heritage. The plague between worlds is still coming, James said, his fingers dancing over controls that had waited centuries for his touch. But this time, we'll be ready for it. All of us, together. News spread across the galaxy like wildfire. On every human colony and settlement, people were experiencing the same awakening. Doctors, teachers, children, ordinary humans, everywhere suddenly found themselves understanding technologies that shouldn't have existed. Sarah Chen's hologram flickered excitedly as she reported from her lab. It's happening everywhere, James. A factory worker in New Delhi just built a quantum stabilizer from spare parts. A teenager in Lagos is drawing up plans for faster-than-light engines. We're remembering everything. From the bridge of the ancient flagship, James watched the transformation of his species with a mixture of awe and understanding. The genetic memories were flowing faster now, each revelation building upon the last. He turned to Catheri, who hadn't left his side since the awakening began. We didn't just hide technology in these ships, he explained, his eyes glowing with the blue light of the neural interface. We hid it in ourselves. Every human alive today carries fragments of our ancient knowledge. Commander Zextal stood quietly in the corner, his metallic features unreadable as he watched humans operating technology that his best engineers couldn't even understand. "Your people," he said finally, "they planned this across thousands of generations. The patience, the scope of it." A new hologram appeared on the bridge. A young girl from a farming colony on the edge of human space. She couldn't have been more than 12, but her hands moved with certainty as she assembled something from old machine parts. "The memory restoration is spreading exponentially," the ship's AI reported. "Humanity is reaching 45% of original knowledge capacity. Critical systems are now fully operational across the fleet." Ktheri's tail swished in excitement as she documented everything. "The greatest archaeological discovery in history," she whispered, "and it was living in your DNA all along." Suddenly, the ship's sensors lit up with new data. James rushed to the control panel, his movements now fluid and practiced. "We're detecting quantum signature duplications," he announced. "All across human space, people aren't just remembering, they're rebuilding." The main screen showed scenes from across human territories. Abandoned warehouses transformed into advanced laboratories, old satellites reconfigured into defense platforms, children's toys reshaped into communication devices that surpassed anything currently in use. "By the eternal void," Commander Zextal breathed. "Your entire civilization, it was just sleeping." Sarah's hologram expanded to show her lab, where impossible machines were taking shape under her newly remembered expertise. "The quantum processors I was working on," she said, "they weren't new inventions at all. They were memories, trying to surface. Our ancestors encoded everything. Art, science, philosophy, all of it waiting for the moment we'd need it again." A deep rumble shook the ship as more systems came online. Throughout the fleet, ancient engines hummed with power that defied modern physics. The neural interface showed James that humans everywhere were instinctively synchronizing their efforts, preparing for the battle that their ancestors had foreseen. "Fleet status report," the AI announced. "Main weapons, online. Quantum shields, online. Dimensional anchors, online. All systems operating at designed capacity." Theri touched one of the glowing displays with a trembling hand. "Your people knew this day would come. They knew they'd need to face the plague again. That's why they hid everything, why they started over. They needed humanity to evolve alongside the threat, to be ready when it returned." James nodded, more memories surfacing with each passing moment. "We didn't retreat," he said, understanding filling his voice. "We went back to the beginning because we needed to become something new, something that could finally stop the plague. And now, Commander Zextal finished, we see what humanity truly is." He straightened, his earlier arrogance replaced with something like respect. "And perhaps, if we are fortunate, we will live to thank them for their sacrifice." The fleet hung in space, its power now fully restored, waiting for humanity to remember its final purpose. The ancient guardians were awakening, and the galaxy would never be the same. The first signs of the plague's approach came as distortions in spacetime, visible even to civilian sensors. Stars began to dim along the edge of the galaxy, their light swallowed by something that defied description. The Galactic Council called an emergency session, their usual political squabbles forgotten in the face of impending doom. "It consumes everything," James explained to the assembled representatives, his eyes still glowing with the neural interface's blue light. "Matter, energy, even the fabric of space itself. This is why our ancestors hid away their power. They knew we'd need to evolve new ways to fight it." The council chamber's main display showed the advancing darkness. Already, 3 uninhabited systems had vanished completely, leaving behind nothing but absolute void. Commander Zextal, now serving as the Vraxian Empire's representative, leaned forward in his seat. "The ancient fleet," he said, "is it ready?" Sarah Chen's hologram appeared before the council. She no longer looked like the uncertain scientist from days ago. Her eyes held the same glow as her brother's, filled with awakened knowledge. "The fleet is only part of the solution," she explained. "Look at these readings from the affected sectors." She gestured, and complex equations filled the air. The plague doesn't just consume. It rewrites the laws of physics themselves. That's why conventional weapons failed 300,000 years ago. Theri, invited to speak as the leading xenorchaeologist, stepped forward. But humanity didn't just hide away their fleet, she said, her tail moving in excited patterns. They hid away their consciousness, their very way of thinking. They evolved alongside their hidden technology, developing in ways the plague couldn't predict. The chamber erupted in startled murmurs as new sensor data appeared. The darkness had consumed another system, but this time, something was different. Where the void touched human-controlled space, it seemed to hesitate, as if encountering something it didn't understand. "Our ancestors fought with pure logic and technology," James said, accessing more genetic memories as he spoke. "But we've evolved to think differently. Art, music, dreams. The plague can't compute these things. It can't consume what it can't understand." Through the neural interface, James could feel millions of humans accessing their ancient knowledge, but filtering it through generations of new experiences. The fleet's quantum eye was adapting, learning from this unique blend of old power and new perspectives. "By the eternal void," Commander Zextol whispered as new readings appeared. "Your weapons, they're not just energy beams or missiles. You're firing pure thought, weaponized creativity. How is that even possible?" Sarah's hologram smiled. "Because we're not just our ancestors reborn. We're something new, something that exists between order and chaos, between ancient knowledge and new dreams. The plague feeds on certainty, and humanity has learned to embrace uncertainty." The council chamber's displays showed the ancient fleet moving into position, but it wasn't just the ships that were preparing for battle. Across human space, awakened minds were linking together, creating defenses that existed somewhere between reality and imagination. "The plague approaches the Centauri sector," the quantum AI announced throughout the fleet. "Time to intercept, 6 hours." James looked at the assembled council representatives, seeing fear mixed with hope in their alien faces. "We're not asking you to understand what we're about to do," he said. "We're just asking you to trust us, like our ancestors trusted us with their legacy." Theri stepped closer to him, her 4 eyes wide with wonder. The ancient humans didn't just build a fleet, she realized. They built a bridge between what was and what could be. The darkness crept closer, consuming light and matter. But where it touched human space, it found something it had never encountered in all its eons of existence, a species that had deliberately forgotten its power, only to rediscover it in an entirely new way. The final battle was about to begin. The void between stars turned into a battlefield unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The ancient fleet, powered by humanity's reawakened knowledge and new consciousness, faced the approaching darkness. James stood on the flagship's bridge, his mind linked with millions of others through the neural interface. "It's trying to analyze us," Sarah's hologram reported, her image flickering as reality itself buckled under the plague's assault. "Just like before, it's trying to find patterns it can break down and consume." But this time was different. Where the plague reached out with its void tendrils, it encountered human creativity and chaos. A ship pilot from Texas merged her knowledge of ancient quantum weapons with her love of jazz music, creating attack patterns that flowed like improvised melodies. A young gamer from Tokyo combined his ancestors' understanding of dimensional physics with his expertise in strategy games. "The plague is retreating in Sector 7. Commander Zextol announced from his command ship, where he coordinated the evacuation of threatened systems. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." Theri, who had refused to leave despite the danger, watched in amazement as human ships danced through space in impossible patterns. "They're not just fighting," she realized. "They're creating. Each attack is unique, a work of art that exists for just a moment." The quantum AI's voice resonated through the fleet. "Plague adaptation detected. shifting to secondary defense protocols. James felt it through the neural link. The plague was learning, trying to understand this new form of humanity. But every time it grasped a pattern, humans shifted to something new. Farmers turned their understanding of crop rotation into complex battlefield maneuvers. Children's imaginary games became real weapons against the void. Remember what we are, James called through the neural network. Not just what we were, but everything we've become. The response was immediate. Across the battlefield, human ships began moving in ways that celebrated their dual nature. Ancient technology powered by new souls, scientific precision, guided by dreams and emotions. The plague couldn't consume what it couldn't categorize, and humanity had become gloriously, wonderfully indefinable. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. The quantum readings are shifting. The plague. It's experiencing something like confusion. Through the massive bridge windows, they watched as the darkness recoiled from a particularly beautiful attack pattern, inspired by a ballet dancer's interpretation of ancient battle strategies. Where the void had been absolute, patches of normal space began to reappear. "Push harder," James commanded. "Show it everything we are." The fleet responded. Ships moved in formations based on poetry and mathematics, firing weapons powered by both quantum physics and pure imagination. Humanity had spent 300,000 years becoming something new, and now they were showing the galaxy why. The plague's retreat began slowly, then accelerated. Unable to process or consume the impossible blend of ancient power and new creativity, it withdrew from the galaxy entirely. Where it had once devoured everything in its path, it now fled from something it couldn't understand. "Victory," the quantum AI announced simply. "Plague entity has left known space. Tracking systems indicate full retreat." The celebrations that erupted across the galaxy were beyond description. Species that had once looked down on humanity as primitives now cheered them as saviors. Commander Zextal, his metallic features somehow managing to convey awe, bowed deeply to James on the bridge. "We called you primitives," he said, "but you were pioneers, not just of space, but of consciousness itself." Ctheri, recording everything for future generations, smiled at James. "Your ancestors would be proud," she said, "not just of how you used their legacy, but of how you transformed it." As the fleet began its victory formation, James looked out at the stars. Stars that still shone because humanity had found a way to be both ancient and new, ordered and chaotic, powerful and creative. They had become something the plague could never defeat, because they had become something it could never understand. "We remember who we were," he said softly, "but more importantly, we know who we are." And across the galaxy, humanity celebrated not just their victory, but their unique journey, from masters of space to beginners, and finally to something gloriously in between.